Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Average Joe's podcast. I am Josh, flying solo this afternoon, Saturday afternoon, getting ready for the NFC and AFC championship games tomorrow, 3 and 6 o'clock on CBS and Fox. Wanted to do this stream for a couple reasons, but it's going to be very Cowboy-centric, as you can see with my attire here. But at the end of the day, we're going to talk some football first, and then we'll get into some Cowboy stuff later on. So I encourage you guys to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are Average Joe's Podcast on YouTube. We also have the several social media outlets listed down below. Average Joe's Podcast on Facebook. You can send us a request and we will let you into our group as long as everything checks out. And then at Joe's570 on Twitter and the Average Joe's _podcast on Instagram. So starting out, getting into last weekend's action, and boy, what a weekend of football it was. All of the divisional games either went to overtime or came down to a last-second play that determined the outcomes. And I think in at least two of the games, I personally wasn't surprised as I picked the Rams and the Bengals to win. But I think those around the NFL and the so-called experts were probably a little shocked to see Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers both lose. I did pick Green Bay, and I did fail on that one, obviously. And I did pick Buffalo. So 2-2 last weekend, not too bad. But at the end of the day, just another edition of why the NFL is so hard to win games, because it's just very highly competitive. And, that Buffalo-Kansas City game that we saw last week was probably among one of the best, craziest games that I've ever seen. I mean, Buffalo took the ball down at every step of the way. Really, at the end of that game, all those touchdowns in those last few seconds, just absolutely stunning how that played out. Patrick Mahomes gets the ball with 13 seconds left, takes the Chiefs right down to tie the game, and then eventually it goes to overtime. I mean, as far as the overtime rules go, my philosophy at this point is that either leave it the way it is right now, or I say play a whole quarter, put another 10 minutes back on the clock and play the thing out to the end, or keep it the way it is. I know there's been some speculation about, teams getting another crack at it when Kansas City scores a touchdown, Buffalo gets the ball, but at the end of the day, I'm not so sure that's the best way to go about that. I do kind of like things the way they are at the moment as compared to that, but I am in favor of a whole quarter being played if that indeed is the case. So when push comes to shove, like I said, I think those are the changes that I would make personally. Other than that, the Bengals are a great story. We'll see what happens tomorrow. I personally don't think they have a chance against the Chiefs. I think that offensive line finally is compromised enough against Kansas City where they're going to have to probably play catch-up, and I don't think that line is good enough to protect Joe Burrow all day long for them to do that. Like I said, it's been a great story all year long. They've been doing the things that good teams do, but with Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, they're never out of it. But like I said, I think with that offensive line, as bad as it was last week against Tennessee, it's one thing to face Ryan Tannehill and go toe-to-toe with him and score 16, 19 points and win games, but I think to beat Kansas City, you're going to have to score 30+, and I'm just not sure that the Bengals could do that, because the one thing we know about the Chiefs is this defense has really turned the season around for them since about mid-season. So the Chiefs are going to be a tough out, and that's who I'm picking for that game tomorrow. As far as the NFC goes, like I said earlier, Aaron Rodgers losing at Lambeau is something that we're kind of accustomed to, unfortunately, for Green Bay fans over the last few years. They started out being undefeated at home in the playoffs, 12-0, but they're just 7-7 since then. So the Green Bay Packers have a crazy offseason ahead of them, because let's face it, right now they are $41 million over the salary cap. Davante Adams is a free agent. Aaron Rodgers is owed $27 million. So the question becomes, what happens with the Green Bay Packers? And I think if you read the tea leaves, Nathaniel Hackett getting hired in Denver kind of points you in the direction that I think it's going to go. I've been saying from the outset that I think Aaron Rodgers is going to go to Denver. I said that before last season started. I believe that even more so now with his offensive coordinator going there. I think it's a perfect fit. Now, whether or not they have the cap space or the wherewithal to get Davante Adams in there as well, they do seem like kind of a package deal. So at the end of the day, I wouldn't be surprised if they both end up in Denver with Hackett. But, that's going to be a pretty interesting thing to watch this offseason. San Francisco, man, you got to hand it to them. They beat my Cowboys in the wild card round. Everybody picked them to win that game. Quite a few less people picked them to win at Lambeau against the Packers. I mean, this is a Green Bay team that has arguably the best quarterback in the league on their team, probably the league's MVP. And, you don't always go into Lambeau and play like that. Obviously, the blocked field goal and blocked punt saved them in that game. They weren't really getting much going. Jimmy Garoppolo is not the type of quarterback that's going to go out and win you ball games, but he's a game manager, and he did just that, kept them in position. The defense played a heck of a game other than an opening drive, and the 49ers are going on to the conference championship game where they're going to face the Los Angeles Rams, who took down Tom Brady and the Bucs. Probably the favorite, if not Green Bay, going into the NFC playoffs. At the end of the day, Tom Brady's got a decision to make here. He's hinting towards retirement. To me personally, it feels like this could be the end. I think if Tom sits down and thinks about it for a little bit, he could change his mind. But I think right now, as things stand, I think Brady, if he had to decide right now, just like Gronk said, if he had to decide right now, it's probably retirement. But I think it's going to take a little bit, and we'll see what happens there. But the Rams, you got to hand it to them. Up 27-3, did everything they could to lose that game, but in the end, they pull it out. 30-27, last second field goal from Matt Stafford, going on to the championship round for the first time in his career, winning his first playoff games this year, in fact, with the Rams. And so it'll be interesting to see if they get back to the Super Bowl where they were just a few years ago, losing to New England. Got to hand it to Sean McVay. I mean, he's a heck of a coach. To have the mindset to go out and upgrade the quarterback position, which we know you need a great one to win in this league. They get rid of Matt Stafford, and they bring in, Jared Goff. They bring in Matt Stafford, and he's made a world of a difference. And you have to think of it this way. So Matthew Stafford's been part of two of the more prolific seasons in NFL history for wide receivers, that being Calvin Johnson when he set the yardage record a few years back before his retirement, and then, of course, Cooper Kupp this year, who led the league in not only receptions but yardage and touchdowns as well from the receiver position. So Matt Stafford, I felt like it was a perfect fit. Rams-Bills was my Super Bowl pick. That won't be accurate, obviously. But at the end of the day, Matt Stafford has made a world of difference for Los Angeles, and you can't discount Cam Akers coming back. I mean, the guy is run with a head of steam every time he touches the ball. Now, I know he had the 2 fumbles. Kind of see how that plays out in this upcoming game, whether they give more Sony Michel touches or if Akers continues to tote the rock. But I think at the end of the day, Akers has made a difference in that team. So we'll kind of see how that plays out there. All right, so getting into the Cowboys stuff, which is really what I wanted to focus on here today. A lot of stuff happening at the Star in Frisco over the last few weeks. Now, before I get into any of this stuff, I just want to say first and foremost that I do believe that Jerry Jones deliberately does some of the stuff that he does to keep the Cowboys relevant in the news cycle since they're eliminated from the playoffs. So I want to start with the wild card game against the 49ers because I haven't had a chance to speak with you guys on my thoughts of that. Mike McCarthy came out and said that his team felt nervous. They felt angst is what he corrected it to. And they sure as heck played like it. I mean, that team came out flat, and this is a tendency now that we've seen a lot from whether it's Jason Garrett coach teams or now Mike McCarthy coach playoff teams. They start slow. And against the 49ers, you can afford to do that, but this is the NFL. The 49ers are walking under the locker room with a big boombox on the shoulder, blasting music, playing loose. And here's the Dallas Cowboys. Tight tendencies are to start flat like we said. They couldn't get the run game going. The offensive line was terrible. The penalties again, man. 14 penalties. The only team in NFL history to lose a playoff game of the 5 with 14 penalties. And they had 2 games this year where they suffered 14 penalties in a game. To me, that's on the coaching. And Mike McCarthy said numerous times this year that the penalties were a thing that they sit there and they look at and they coach. But at the end of the day, the problem wasn't fixed. I mean, this was a problem from the very beginning of the season. So I'm aggravated, as I'm sure most Cowboy fans are at this point. Everybody wants to point to Dak's decision on that final snap there to not get the ball spiked. The drive before that, to me, is the one that lost in the game. 2.5 minutes, 3 timeouts, and you get a big conversion of almost 40 yards to Dalton Schultz to start the drive, and then you go 3 and out from there and have to punt and then rely on your defense to get the ball back. To me, that was where the game was lost. as aggravated as I was with the referee, running into Dak, basically tackling him, not getting the ball spotted, and they did have it 2 yards wrong to the good anyway. It just aggravated the living hell out of me that they couldn't get anything going on the prior drive. I thought going into that game the Cowboys were the better team. I'll be honest, I was nervous. I don't put a lot of stock into what these national analysts say, but everybody to a man was picking the 49ers, and they were saying, oh, this is a terrible matchup for the Cowboys. This is the last team they wanted to see. I thought the Cowboys played it right. I mean, that last week against Philly, they went out there, they whooped them in Philly, and second time in 3 games putting up 50-plus points. They played well. Granted, it was against Philly's JV team. I don't care. It's the NFL. All those guys are on an NFL roster. There's only 50-some of them on there. And so they went out there, they earned the number 3 seed, and they faced a team that was the number 6. I mean, you can't ask for much more than that. So I was fully expecting them to beat the 49ers and go to Tampa and get that rematch with Brady, like Dak said they would week 1. He said, we'll see you in the playoffs, and sure enough, that would have set up a matchup in Tampa the following week. But with the run game, and then of course after the game, we find out that Zeke was playing on a torn PCL for a majority of the season, basically since the Carolina game. So I'm thinking, you're going to sit there and defend the choice to not give Tony Pollard more carries, and yet you've got a running back out there with a torn knee ligament. Obviously doesn't look 100% by any means. And then you have that happen. It's just inexcusable. So just going off the 49er game, very disappointing. I thought for sure the Cowboys were a divisional round team. Obviously they proved me wrong. But at the end of the day, here we are, another bum off season, waiting to get things going here with the draft and the Senior Bowl and all that stuff coming up. So now getting into the actual news that broke over the past few weeks. So as we know, Sean Payton stepped down as head coach of the New Orleans Saints, and of course the rumblings start. Sean Payton was under Bill Parcells, the offensive coordinator here back in the mid-2000s, of course. Left for New Orleans, resurrected that team, and so the speculation starts. Sean Payton's coming to Dallas, and it all kind of started because Mike McCarthy was not given a vote of confidence by Jerry Jones after that loss to San Francisco. Steven went on 105.3 The Fan a few weeks later and said, absolutely Mike's our head coach next year, and that's all well and good. But at the end of the day, he never gave him that 100% vote of confidence, and so the speculation starts swirling. Will Sean Payton be the next head coach of the Dallas Cowboys? And the answer, as we found out, is not going to be the case, at least not this season. So I'd like to spend a few minutes to talk about the coaching situation here, because as we found out 2 days ago, Dan Quinn will be back as defensive coordinator. And I got to tell you, minus any free agent transactions that take place over the next few weeks, bringing Dan Quinn back as a defensive coordinator with Micah Parsons, Trayvon Diggs, DeMarcus Lawrence, hopefully Randy Gregory, that is huge. I mean, to go from what Mike Nolan put on the field last year, the worst defense in franchise history, to what they had this year, middle of the pack defense statistically, but man, getting after the quarterback, a rookie with 13.5 sacks, a corner with 11 interceptions. I mean, that's remarkable. So, Dan Quinn went out there and did what he had to do, turn this defense around, and, we'll see what this next season brings. But, Jerry, again, went on 105.3 The Fan yesterday. I listened to it, 20-minute interview, and he said that Dan Quinn had an offer on the table and he turned it down to stay with the Cowboys. Now, if that's true, then Jerry, we know he's a great businessman, but man, what a remarkable job of doing that to keep him around. Now, Mike McCarthy is thrilled, I'm sure, but I look at it like this. Dan Quinn sticking around as a defensive coordinator is great for the team, but you could potentially have the future head coach of this team in waiting on that staff. I mean, if Mike McCarthy gets fired next year, and to me they have to get at least to the NFC Championship game for Mike McCarthy to keep his job, Dan Quinn or Sean Payton is going to be the head coach of this team next season if McCarthy gets fired. 2 years from now. McCarthy will be back next year. And I think that's the right call. I think McCarthy does deserve a third chance at this. Last year, due to COVID, new coach, new system, all this, a lot of injuries. Obviously, the season sucked. They went 6-10. They were in it till the very end, of course, but at the end of the day, it wasn't good enough. So then they come back out this year and they make progress. They make it to the playoffs. They don't win a playoff game. Now, technically, progress next year would be to win a playoff game. But if they win in the wild card round and then get bounced in the divisional, I'm still saying McCarthy gets fired, to be honest with you. Now, at face value, you would say, well, Sean Payton's got to be a better head coach than Mike McCarthy, right? When you look at the statistics, Mike McCarthy's actually been to an additional championship game than Payton. They have pretty much similar wins. They both have the Super Bowl title. But it's a lot closer than you think. And my initial thought was, well, Sean Payton's a way better coach than Mike McCarthy. But ultimately, the truth is they're very similar. They've been to very similar positions in the playoffs. They've each been to the one Super Bowl. But at the end of the day, Sean Payton's the hot commodity. I don't know what he's going to do. I wouldn't rule out a Bill Cowher type scenario where he's not done. At least he says he's not, but then he never coaches again. 58 years old, not young particularly, but obviously young enough to come back and coach still. So I think Sean Payton or Dan Quinn is the head coach of this team in 2 years if McCarthy spits the bit next year. And again, for me personally, that's the NFC Championship game at least, possibly the Super Bowl. But I think if he gets to the NFC title game, which would be the first since '95, I think McCarthy would be retained. But if not, I think Dan Quinn or Sean Payton becomes the head coach of this team in 2023. So looking ahead here to free agency, the Cowboys have a lot of free agents that they need to re-sign here, and they don't have a lot of cap space. In fact, they're over the cap by about $21 million. Now, there's speculation out there that they may move on from Amari Cooper. I'm not a huge fan of that. You guys remember what that offense was like before they traded for him a few years ago. It was putrid. He's by far their best route runner. He's still, in my opinion, their best receiver. I know CeeDee Lamb is great, but he kind of took a down step this year, in my opinion. Like, everybody was expecting this huge breakout season, especially from the way he looked at Oxnard in training camp, and I didn't think CeeDee Lamb was anything special, to be honest with you. So I think Amari Cooper has to be back on this team. I'm not saying he definitely will be, but I think it's a must if you want to go where you want to go offensively. As far as the backfield goes, a lot of people want to see Zeke get out of here. But I think with the contract that he was given a few years ago when he threatened to hold out, it's near impossible to release him without a huge cap hit right now. So I think the backfield just needs to be more of a 50-50 split with him and Pollard. Now, maybe one of the biggest free agents on the offensive side of the ball is Dalton Schultz. I mean, he had a great year at tight end. He's made progress every season. Blake Jarwin missed all of last season with a torn ACL, injured week 1. Missed a lot of games this year with a hip injury. Me personally, I'm moving on from Blake Jarwin and re-signing Dalton Schultz, even though he's going to cost you probably $10 or $12 million a year. He could be a franchise tag candidate as well. I know you can't sign everybody in these things, but if I'm the Cowboys, there's a couple guys that I'm looking at, and you could use a franchise tag on at least one of these dudes. But I'm re-signing Randy Gregory. I'm re-signing Brian Anger, the punter. I'm re-signing Dalton Schultz. I'm trying to get either Jaron Kearse or Malik Hooker back. Okay? So, I mean, those are guys that I think you absolutely have to have, and then the rest of your team you got to build around the draft. So, my guess is you're probably going to lose Leighton Vander Esch. I don't think he's played well enough to warrant a second contract here unless he takes a hometown discount. I mean, the guy was basically injury-plagued every year except this. Lo and behold, contract year. They didn't pick up his fifth-year option. So you're going to need a linebacker in the draft because Micah Parsons is great, but they like to use him in pass rushing situations. He's not always a full-out linebacker. Jabril Cox, you like to think the future's bright with him, but he tore his ACL, so you really don't know what you have. So linebacker's a huge need, and if we're looking at some draft prospects, I think it starts and ends with Nakobe Dean out of Georgia. I mean, that defense was phenomenal. You saw it in the national championship game and their win against Bama. I think Nakobe Dean would be a great fit for Dan Quinn's defense here in Dallas, and so he's a guy that I have my eye on in that first round if he slips to 24. And you know what? There's been a lot of talk about Tyler Linderbaum, the center from Iowa, and he's great. Don't get me wrong. Phenomenal talent. But I don't think Tyler Biadasz has been that bad. I mean, I'm in the minority. I know that for sure. But I don't think Tyler Biadasz has been so bad to the point where you need to move on from him and get someone else. Like, the left guard is the problem in my opinion. Connor Williams is another free agent that's gone. I mean, he's not coming back, and it's not because they can't afford him. It's because he's not worth it. I mean, the guy committed more penalties than anybody in the offensive line, and that's after being benched for a few games with Connor McGovern. So to me, Connor Williams is gone, and now you have a hole at left tackle, and the question becomes, how do you fill that? Well, I think it needs to start at least. I'm not saying this is how the year finishes, but I think it needs to start by putting Lyle Collins, who is currently your right tackle, at left guard in place of Connor Williams. And then you're going to put Terrence Steele in there at right tackle, who I thought played phenomenal when he filled in for Lyle Collins during his 5-game suspension. Now, when he went over to the left side and took Tyron Smith's place due to injury, he wasn't as good. But I think he's more of a right tackle, and I think he could be the future there. And they may have found something. For a guy that had a lot of struggles last season, he played really well at right tackle this year. So in my opinion, Lyle Collins moves to left guard, Terrence Steele to right tackle, and then of course you still have Tyron Smith, which you're not going to be able to count on him for a ton of games. So you're going to have to go out and find yourself a swing tackle for that left tackle position. And then of course Zach Martin. Now Connor McGovern's an interesting one because he showed some things this year as far as getting starts go. The first one being in Kansas City, which is a hell of a place to get your first start this season. But he was more suited, I think, for that fullback type role that they had him in there for at certain points throughout the season. So at the end of the day, if I had to guess, your starting 5 linemen going into training camp next year would be Tyron Smith, Lyle Collins, Tyler Biotic, Zach Martin, Terrence Steele. That's who I would run out there as my starting 5 offensive linemen at this point. Now, as far as receiver goes, it's another interesting one. I touched on it a little bit with Amari Cooper. He's under contract. CeeDee Lamb's under contract, but you've got quite a few free agents aside from that. Noah Brown, Malik Turner, Cedric Wilson, Michael Gallup, all free agents. Now, me personally, I'm bringing back Cedric Wilson. I think he's probably the guy that you can re-sign for the cheapest that has the most talent. So that's what I'm probably going to do as far as receiver goes. Outside of that, Michael Gallup, you may be able to get him on a cheap 1-year deal with the knee injury just to kind of see and prove what he is. But I think right now, it's got to be Cedric Wilson, in my opinion. And not just because of his receiving skill. We've seen a few times this year on that wide receiver pass play. Guy's got a great arm. And I know that's not a dimension that you're going to utilize a ton. But at the end of the day, it's definitely something that you could use there to go ahead and plug that in. And by the way, Kellen Moore, behind those play calls, he's probably going to be back. He has a second interview with the Miami Dolphins. I don't think he's ready for a head coach job, to be honest, guys. I think he's not back. He is back, as he doesn't get a head coaching job, in my opinion, next season. So Kellen Moore is probably calling your plays again next year in Dallas, at least for another season. And then, we'll kind of see how this goes, because if it goes south, we're going to be blowing this whole thing up and starting from scratch. Other than that, at this point, me personally, I'm always plugged into DallasCowboys.com, 105.3 The Fan. They're in draft mode now, so we're getting ready for the draft. We've got the Senior Bowl coming up. Before I forget, my Super Bowl pick is Rams-Chiefs. I think that's who you're going to see play in this year's Super Bowl. But as far as the Cowboys go, we're in draft mode now. So the 2 prospects, as of right now, that I'm looking at, Nakobe Dean from Georgia, the linebacker, and Tyler Linderbaum, the center from Iowa. I think those are the 2 guys to keep your eye on as possible Cowboys prospects. Outside of that, that's pretty much it for the Cowboys news at the moment. We'll have to wait and see. Joe Witt, the assistant D coordinator, is getting some interviews in Pittsburgh and Seattle and some other places. So we'll kind of see how that plays out. But, Dan Quinn coming back is huge, guys. You talk about free agent signings. He was A1A as far as bringing those free agents back. That coach, Dan Quinn, what he did for that defense this past season was phenomenal. And I hate to say it, but it's going to be very hard to replicate that. As good as a coach as he is, and as good a player as Micah Parsons is, I think it's going to be very difficult to replicate that success again next season. So we'll see what happens there. At the end of the day, it's just kind of wait and see, because they may lose some of those key pieces that contributed to that great defensive effort this past year. One last thing that I wanted to leave you guys with is the Baseball Hall of Fame controversy that surfaced this week. David Ortiz ends up being the only guy to get in. You had guys like Barry Bonds, Curt Schilling, Roger Clemens, in their last year of eligibility. They unfortunately don't get in. And I find it very difficult to keep track of what baseball does here, because you've got guys that tested positive and used PEDs in the past in the Hall of Fame, like Alex Rodriguez, David Ortiz now. And yet, these guys that were not only Hall of Famers before they used steroids, but were a big part of Major League Baseball history, especially with Bonds, the home run records, and all that stuff. Schilling with the bloody sock. Clemens, just a great pitcher for a lot of years with the Yankees, Red Sox, and Blue Jays. And I think baseball needs to do a better job of delineating where the Hall of Fame credentials start and stop, because I think it's hypocritical at times to have certain guys in the Hall of Fame, others not in the Hall of Fame, especially when it's a mixed bag as far as PEDs go. So I would like to see, Bonds and Clemens and those guys eventually get in. McGuire too. I know they cheated, but if it wasn't for cheaters already being in the Hall of Fame, I'd probably be singing a different tune. But right now, at the moment, when you have guys in the Hall of Fame that either deserve or not deserve to be there, you just can't have it both ways. So just wanted to give my quick thoughts on the Baseball Hall of Fame stuff. NASCAR-wise, we've got the Clash at the Coliseum coming up next weekend. Next Sunday night, we have that. That's going to be an interesting thing to kick off the NASCAR season and the next-gen car. We've got the duels at Daytona after that to set the qualifying positions outside of the first two for the Daytona 500, and then, of course, the Great American Race the following weekend. So a lot of good stuff coming up here in the sports world. I'll try to do these recordings here and there. Once again, the Average Joe's podcast can be found on Spotify, on Anchor. We have the live Facebook shows that we've done in the past. You could be looking for possibly a mock draft type show like we did last year, where it's me, Tim, Johnny Glow, Jake. We're sitting down and doing some mock drafting of the first round. You may expect that coming up here soon, around April. And, other than that, we're kind of just laying in the weeds waiting for big stuff to happen and do these podcasts as they come up. But definitely check out our YouTube channel, subscribe, hit that like button if you appreciate our videos. We've got some old stuff up there. We interviewed Big Money Matt Hirschman, who's kind of the king of Evergreen. Brandon Ultra, one of our buddies that races modifieds and street stocks. So, we've got a lot of content on there that I think you guys will enjoy to check out. So, I appreciate you guys tuning in. Like I said, subscribe and like that video if you appreciate what we have to talk about. In the comments below, let me know who your Super Bowl pick is, and let me know what your thoughts are, you Cowboy fans out there on free agency. Like I said, I think Dan Quinn has been an excellent addition to our coaching staff. We all thought he was probably gone for a head coaching job, me especially in Denver. But with Nathaniel Hackett going there, does this now mean that Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams are headed out to Colorado to play next season? So, like I said, guys, appreciate you joining us, and look forward to talking to you guys sometime soon. Take care.